Chapter 20. Surprising Confession. It took but the fraction of a second for Nancy and the others trapped in the laboratory to realize the danger they faced. The sack hurled onto the furnace might explode at any moment. Instantly, Officer Beaumont jumped from his hiding place and made a grab for the bag. Fortunately, it had not yet ignited. As a precaution, he dropped it into a pail of water which stood nearby. By this time, everyone else had jumped up. Nancy exclaimed, "We mustn't let that awful man Abdul get away!" She started for the doorway through which the Arab had fled, but then remembered he had bolted it from the outside. Those in the room were prisoners. Nancy collected her wits. First, she thanked Beaumont for saving them all. He shrugged this off and said, "We will have to break down the door and go after that crazy fool." Suddenly, Nancy stared across the room in horror. Monsieur Leblanc had collapsed and was lying on his back, apparently unable to get up. Bess had already noticed this and was searching in vain for fresh water to revive him. Frantically, she dug into her dress pocket and pulled out a small vial of perfume. Bess held it under Leblanc's nostrils. He took a deep whiff and almost instantly sat up. In the meantime, the two policemen and Mr. Drew were heaving their bodies against the rear door. There was a loud splintering sound, and finally the door began to give way. The second it crashed down, the officers scrambled out and dashed up the corridor. Nancy started to follow, but her father held her back. "Let those lawmen handle the job," he said. "Beaumont was right when he called the faker crazy. No telling what he'll do." The young sleuth became agitated at the delay. But only 10 minutes had elapsed when they heard footsteps and voices in the corridor. Everyone gazed out, and in the dimly lighted area they could see the police officers returning. With them were Louis Aubert and the grayish blonde woman. "She was the one who was singing the madrigals!" Nancy exclaimed. Those in the laboratory could hear the woman saying, "My husband is a great scientist. He could not do anything wrong." "We'll see about that," said Officer Beaumont. "Anybody who wears a disguise and cheats people out of money by pretending he can turn almost anything into gold has a lot to answer for." Carreau added, "To say nothing of threatening lives." Madame Aubert said no more. As the four entered the laboratory, Louis glared malevolently at Leblanc, Mr. Drew, and the girls. At first, he would answer no questions, but when confronted with accusations from the financier, Nancy, Bess and George, the would-be scientist broke down and admitted to engineering the holdup of Monsieur Leblanc, as well as practically all of the other charges against him. Bess, proud of Nancy's sleuthing, said, "He has confessed to just about everything you suspected him of, even the canoe incident and to hiring 2 boys to follow us and get information." Nancy, too, was elated, not only at the capture, but also because her father's mystery had been solved. There were still a few questions in her mind, which she now put to the prisoner. "Your brother Claude forged the letters of recommendation which you showed to Monsieur Leblanc, didn't he?" "Yes." Aubert also revealed that it was Claude who had written the letters about a helipad being built on the Drews' roof. The young detective suggested that the various other happenings in River Heights had been Claude's work, while those in France were Louis's schemes. "That's right. I suppose you'll get it out of me sooner or later how I knew about you, Drews, so I might as well tell you. a servant of the Tremaines, is a friend of mine. It was he who stole an invitation for me to the soirée. He used to eavesdrop on conversations and found out that Mr. Drew had been retained secretly to investigate why Leblanc was selling his holdings. I did not want my scheme ruined, so I sent Claude to the United States. With his ability to forge all kinds of documents, it wasn't hard for him to enter your country under another name. Unfortunately, your father had left. But he did learn that you were coming, and he did his best to frighten you into staying home. You used lots of names besides Abdul, George said to him. Monsieur Neuf, the Green Lion, the Red King. Aubert admitted this, adding that Claude, too, had used Neuf and the Lion on the warnings to the Drews. The prisoner bragged. I know a lot about astrology and the practices of ancient alchemists. That's what gave me the idea about the gold and using alchemist symbols. The M9 chalk mark had been left by Aubert at l'Orangerie as the place for Leblanc to leave money, but he had rubbed it out upon spotting the girls there. During the interrogation, his wife had been sitting on a bench, pale with shock. She kept daubing her eyes with a handkerchief and murmuring, I knew nothing about this. Nancy went over and sat down beside the distraught woman. The young sleuth had not forgotten she had a mystery of her own to solve. In a kind voice, Nancy asked, Were you Mademoiselle Lucille Manot? Why, yes. I'm a friend of Mrs. Josette Blair. You were her governess many years ago. She has a recurring dream that frightens her. We thought perhaps you could explain the meaning of it. The woman looked puzzled. I do not understand, she said. I took care of Josette when she was only 3 years old. Her dream dates back to that time, Nancy explained, and told about the nightmare. As Nancy finished speaking, the woman began to weep aloud. Yes, I can explain. In a way, Louis was responsible for this. I suppose he has always mesmerized me, as he has Monsieur Leblanc. During the time I was taking care of Josette, he was a guest at a chateau where the little girl and I had been left for a short time while her parents were away. Louis and I fell in love, and as it was not considered proper for a guest and an employee to date, we had to meet secretly. Madame Aubert went on to say that Louis had already come upon the ruin with the underground alchemist's laboratory. It became our meeting place. One day I had to bring Josette along. He did not want her to recognize him or to see the laboratory, for fear she would tell others about it. Louis wanted to keep the place a secret until he was ready to reveal a great scientific fact to the world. The ex-governess went on. I thought up the idea of playing blind man's buff. I took Josette to the woods and then blindfolded her. After we had played the game a while, I led her here. When I told her she was going down steep steps, Josette became afraid. I said I would hold her hand and she should count. Of course, she could not count very far, so I did the rest. And the total, of course, turned out to be 99, Nancy put in. That is right, Lucille Aubert answered. Louis thinks the alchemist who built this place chose that number of steps because it's a multiple of 9, a magic number for alchemists. The chateau dates back to the 14th century. The ex-governess continued. After Louis and I had looked at his laboratory, we 3 went back up the steps. Josette was still blindfolded. Just as she reached the top, she lost her balance and started to fall. Louis caught her, but for a long time after that, poor little Josette used to cry out in her sleep. No wonder the 99 steps made such a deep impression on her, Bess remarked. Madame Aubert hung her head. Not long after the incident, Josette's mother discharged me. I guess she suspected I was responsible for scaring her daughter. A short time later, Louis and I were married. Her husband spoke up. When I found out the Bardot sisters were going to the Drews' home, I eavesdropped at the Bardots a good deal. One day I heard Madame Bardot read a letter from Mrs. Blair about the dream, and I decided to send the warning note to her. Claude carried on from there. My wife didn't know anything about it. Nancy said she was sure that when Mrs. Blair heard the story, her nightmares would cease. Nancy expressed her sympathy to Madame Aubert for her present predicament. At that moment, Officer Beaumont walked over to them. "I'm sorry, madam," he said. "You must come with us for further questioning." Tears rolling down her cheeks, the woman arose. But suddenly she turned and said to Nancy, "Remember me to Mrs. Blair, and tell her I loved her dearly." Nancy felt her own eyes becoming a little dewy. "I'll be happy to," she replied. Louis Aubert was made to release the secret lock on the door leading to the 99 steps. Before mounting them, Nancy suddenly remembered one part of the mystery was still unsolved. She asked Beaumont, "Did you search the Arab costume?" The officer admitted they had not. "Wait here," he directed, then hurried back into the rear corridor. He returned holding the robe, turban, and false hair. Beaumont searched the various pockets the costume contained. As Nancy had suspected, Madame Bardot's missing gold pieces were hidden in several of them. After a search, the rest were found hidden about the laboratory. Everyone looked at Nancy admiringly. The officers shook their heads and Beaumont commented, "Mademoiselle Drew, vous êtes merveilleuse." George grinned. "In other words, Nancy, you're the greatest." Her words were to prove true again when Nancy met her next challenge in the clue in the crossword cipher. The Auberts were led away. Then Nancy beckoned the others to precede her from the laboratory. Smiling, they all exchanged knowing glances. The young sleuth wanted to be the one to close the door to the mystery of the 99 steps. The end.